history's making a huge sort of karmic dance, and we're the actors. And here was the second battle of Issus, which was pretty important, really. And Heraclius, the great emperor of Byzantium who won it, deserves to be, pretty well honoured for this. And it bought Byzantine, people a breathing space. And it was, an important victory, really. So, dating-wise, it's really interesting, isn't it, that it takes place in the same year as the Hijra. So, what happens next? Well, Muhammad is now in Medina. He continues to get the Quran. It continues to channel down through him. And now, because he's no longer married to his dead widow, his dead wife, rather, Khadija, he feels free to now remarry. So he marries Aisha in 623, who is quite young, and that was the custom. You married a girl when they reached puberty. She's having her periods, so that's fine then. And to our taste, that's a bit young, but it was the custom in those days. And the next year, he changes the Qibla to Mecca from Jerusalem, which is interesting because he's now saying, look, Jerusalem, it's in the hands of the Persians still. It was by then. Can't do much about that. So let's just try and liberate our own backyard. Let's sort Mecca out and bring that into the domain of the eternal divine intelligence. Then Muhammad has to fight some pretty scary battles. The Battle of Badr, he wins, just 624. And then the Battle of Uhud, 625. He kind of more or less loses it. And then it looks like he's going to be wiped out. A huge army from the Meccans come in 627. And they have the Battle of the Trench. Now, this is all going on in the context of Heraclius fighting the Persian Empire. And it's a similar fight to the death between the superpowers of the day as is going on in the microcosm in Mecca. And miraculously, Muhammad wins the battles. And he is not defeated and killed. The following year, 628, the Yemen, which is under a Zoroastrian governor, even converts to Islam. Muhammad has written and said, look, you ought to be Muslims. How about it? And the governor says, actually, yes, I think I will, because I don't really like the Zoroastrian ruler of the empire. He was not a very nice man. And so he became a Muslim. That's how the Yemen became Islamic. And I wish to God they'd all agree on what kind of Islam they want. Make it a tolerant, loving kind. Stop their civil war. Go beyond the Shia-Sunni split and find peace. And I wish the foreign powers like Saudi Arabia, which is just ridiculous to be involved, should stop all their intervention. And the UK and USA, which are just like the mercenaries of the dark forces of the planet at the moment, should just pack up and go home. I mean, somebody should knock on the door of the MOD in London and issue them a writ. Stop interfering in foreign wars, mate, or we're going to arrest you. If there was a decent government in Westminster, they would issue that writ. I'm very happy to go back and be Minister of Peace in the UK, by the way. And I would issue personally that writ, as I hope there would be one from the Nonagon, when we can get a Department of Peace in America as well. We have to stop these military types. They have no conscience, no morality. They just see wars as an opportunity to sell weapons. Well, enough is enough. That was Theresa May's husband, Philip May. He was selling the bombs that were killing children in Yemen. Disgraceful. These people should be stopped. Now, I'm with the authentic, Islamic, mystical, esoteric, Christian, Gnostic, Sufi, Druid tradition, which says war is an anathema. And we have to stop it because life is what is important. Anyway, in that year, 628, big year, not only does Yemen convert and become Muslim, bless them, hello, but also the Emperor Heraclius, after winning a huge battle in Mosul in Iraq against the Zoroastrians, he then gets Jerusalem in 628, and he does something very noble. He walks all the way from Hims, or Homs as it's called now, in Syria. In fulfillment of a vow, he walks from Homs all the way to Jerusalem to sort of take control back from the Byzantine state. He was obviously quite a spiritual man. And ironically, I have visiting with me here a Syrian Christian girl who is from Homs, the same place where Heraclius set out from. And she's translating my Interfaith Peace Treaty into Arabic at the moment, because in Syria they all speak Arabic. Although her version of Arabic is also has shades of the Aramaic language and the old ancient Syriac that Christ spoke. And their scriptures are in the old Syriac as well. So anyway, so Heraclius gets Jerusalem back, and Yemen becomes Islamic. And really, and eventually, not long after, Mecca is peacefully conquered. Well, they use the word conquered. It's like reincorporated into the Islamic world, because Muhammad goes there on a peaceful takeover after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah and some skillful diplomacy, peace diplomacy, which really make plain that Islam is about non-violent takeover of the return to the original wisdom that should be in all of us. Islam is the surrender of ego, which is the false self, historically constructed and psychologically constructed. It's the return to the original self we were given before we were born, which is our soul from God. The divine intelligence gave us all that personal intelligence, the you that is you, the me that is me, the self within the self that Jung talks about. That comes from the divine. And Islam is when we worship with that to the absolute. That's what Christ talked about, when the day will come when we worship God in truth and in spirit. That's what he meant. And that's why Muslims are right when they say that Muhammad, was trying to fulfill and continue the original teachings of Christ's Gnostic, esoteric, kingdom of God, wisdom lineage. And what I'm doing in my commentary on the Quran is I'm explaining that in great detail. I'm showing how that gets into the Quran. And you can see into the mind of Muhammad as recipient of the divine gnosis, how he then transmits that out in the surahs. It's absolutely fascinating stuff. And then in 632, not long after getting back into Mecca, Muhammad died and gave his last verse. He had his last pilgrimage. It was a lovely end for a very amazing life's experience that Muhammad had been through. But unfortunately, he left a bit of chaos in his wake because of his, he didn't leave a clear will. He didn't nominate, yes, Ali is my successor. That's it, straightforward. All questions to Ali. He didn't put that in writing. He should have done. And this enabled Abu Bakr, the father of Aisha, to claim to be the real caliph. And and it's always been in chaos ever since. This is why, if you're interested in prophetic intelligence, for God's sake, leave a will. If you're interested in leaving peace behind you and non-turbulence, then carefully choose your partners. I mean, I think Muhammad probably mischose with Aisha, because he should have perhaps stayed faithful to the memory of Khadijah, and I suspect he would have left a more noble afterwake in his stead. As it was, Aisha and Ali fell out, and they came to blows, and Aisha was not of an intellectual depth sufficient, or spiritual depth, to really understand what was going on. She was a child, and it's not a blame on her. She had many, many wonderful qualities, and I have many friends who love Aisha, but unfortunately, when it came to the gravitas needed to sort of choreograph the entire post-Muhammad settlement and orientate it in a peace direction, no, she didn't have that. She was sadly just, the daughter of Abu Bakr. Okay, so then let's just carry on with our reading of the surah. So this is all, you need to know all that background to understand why this surah on Rome is so important. Because Muhammad was living at a time when these superpowers are going to war, and his whole life, the narration of his revelation was, I think, an attempt to mediate. He was trying to say, look, God doesn't want the Byzantines to take over and run their superstate and enforce their Trinitarianism. Every other page in the Quran is saying, no, we don't want that Byzantine Trinitarianism. We want Jesus, but we don't want that Orthodox Trinitarian, heresy hunting thing. But he also doesn't want Zoroastrianism. He doesn't want, the prophets' words to be frozen in time and nothing since that. Because no, he's saying, look, I'm a prophet now. I'm the one on the block holding the torch. It's thought that he was influenced strongly by Manichaeans in that, because Mani, 100 years or so before Constantine, and about 300 years before Muhammad, 400 years even, had said the same. Mani had said, look, Jesus was then, I'm Mani. Welcome to my revelation. And the Manichaeans had this worldview whereby there was a succession of prophetic avatars, and Mani saw himself as the latest on the block. Now, when Muhammad learned that, as he undoubtedly did in Hira, he thought to himself, well, okay, but that was then. Mani's gone, and we still haven't got peace in the world, so I'm going to be the Mani of this age. I'm going to be the prophetic downloader of our time. And I'm sure that he was helped and aided and inspired by people he met, as I say, in Hira and in the environs of, throughout his travels in Arabia. There are some scholars that say that Waraka and Khadija had an actual, Ebionite church, they call it, and that at that time they were encouraging people to follow that teaching. But, okay, so let me go back to the thing. So the Quran is saying in verse 3 that ultimately whether, the Byzantine state's going to win or the Persian state, it's all in the hands of God. And God is the Lord of history. And with the help of God, he helps whom he will. And he is exalted in might, most merciful. It is the promise of God. Never does God depart from his promise, but most men understand not. So this is a profound download Muhammad is getting during this war, right? And it's being shown to him that actually who wins this superpower battle is almost irrelevant. It's who's faithful to the one, the director, the Lord of history. He will, or she will, inherit, the kingdom. But most men don't understand that, it says. They know but the outer things in the life of this world. But of the end of things, they're heedless. Well, that's very interesting, isn't it? And the thing is, it's still true in our day. The Americans who thought for 20 years they were going to bomb the Afghans into submission had never read these verses. Because America is like the new Rome. In its self-conscious inheritance, it sees itself as the new Rome, just as Moscow sees itself to some extent as the new Rome. So these two Roman descendants, the capital with the Senate, which is named after the Roman legislative chamber, the American New Rome on the Potomac, tries to bomb a little desert country with not much going on apart from wisdom and the Quran. And these people managed to defeat them off after 20 years of trying. And it's revealed that trillions of dollars, you cannot buy the soul of a country. You cannot defeat a people's pride. You cannot defeat why not? Well, if only they'd studied a bit more, if they'd done more Quranic studies, if they'd listened to my commentary on the Quran, I could have told them this 20 years ago. In fact, I tried to. I was set up my institute already in 93, and in 91, sorry, and we were trying to mediate over the Afghan situation in the late 90s. But nobody listens to me. Hey, I'm just a philosopher, just a sage on the block, holding the torch of gnosis. Well, the American way of thinking, and it's not just American, it's the military capitalist elites. They run London, and make the Queen do what she wants. She maybe doesn't want to do, but they made her do Brexit. Those people are without ethics, without soul, and without a concept of the importance of peace. I think they're so terrified of Islam because they realise actually in Islam is the secret of peace. But they're not interested in that. They only want the outer things of the world, which is money, power, status, not the end of things. Okay, so that's kind of a little glimpse into what this commentary is about, and I'm trying to relate it to contemporary events. I'm trying to say, okay, so what's happened in Afghanistan? I want to end by just commenting briefly on what's going on in Afghanistan. So the leader of the Taliban is a chap called Abdul Ghani Baradar. And he was originally helped found the Taliban. He was fighting with Mullah Omar, who founded it with him, against the Soviets way back in 1979. He was arrested in Pakistan in 2010 after being kind of on the run after the invasion by America. But what's very interesting, he was then released in 2018 on the wishes of the US. Why? Well, maybe they thought that they would eventually be able to work out a peace deal, which is sort of what's happened. The Taliban and the US behind the scenes have finally realised that if the people of Afghanistan are going to have any future, they have to have a peace deal. And that's what they signed in Doha. I wish they'd included the Afghan government in that, and I wish they'd got, like a sort of constitutional agreement in place that different parties could stand. There was some sort of democracy. I hope they move towards a constitutional government in Afghanistan. And I hope that universal norms of human rights law are observed, not just a particular interpretation of the Sharia. You see, whilst the Sharia is wonderful, and I'm not against it, I would say that proper study of Islamic law teaches one a certain humility, because there are different versions of the Sharia. There are more lenient and less lenient. There are more compassionate and less compassionate. And then there's a Sharia for Shias and one for Sunnis. And again, they have slight differences. And then the Ismailis and the Sufis and, other Islamic groups have their own readings of law. Now, what I would like to see is at the University of Kabul in the Legal Studies Department, I'd like to see a kind of commission set up of the greatest Islamic scholars from Afghanistan. They should invite experts, neutral experts from all branches of Islam, to come and discuss and help them draft a constitution which would enshrine the very best of authentic compassion and true liberalism, which is what that means, the bias towards freedom, with tradition and the best and most profound decisions and legal hearings of the past, because Islam is rich in compassionate application of the Quran to complex life situations. Life is complex, and a jurist, a good Islamic scholar, can use the Quran to then try and find a compassionate solution to problems like marital problems or family quarrels over who's got which field or all that stuff. It's, if you follow the Quran as I'm teaching it in my commentary, you'll find it's a tool for compassionate conflict resolution and wisdom accumulation. Nobody wants a country to be tyrannized and feel terrified and about who's going to come along and punish us. No, the conscience of one's own heart, one's own soul before God, is what dictates what is the path to follow. When you realise that's what the Quran is telling you, then you can echo the words of Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson said a wonderful thing. He's quoted this by Tolstoy in his Book of Sages. Jefferson said, look, the American Indians didn't have loads of written laws. They didn't bother with all that. What they had was the conscience written in human hearts, which knows the difference between right and wrong and good and evil. And they followed that. And that's how they managed to have a successful, creative and loving societies for so long with art and storytelling and spirituality and piety. Thomas Jefferson greatly respected American Indian culture. And it's interesting that Tolstoy had picked up on that, because that was essentially the tradition of Gandhi, which was influenced by Tolstoy. Ruskin played a part in that. When I was educational director to the Gandhi Foundation, I learned all this stuff. So Gandhi said the law of God lives in our hearts and our consciences and our minds. He was a lawyer, right? You can't write that down. It's the place from which all good laws are written down. The conscience itself cannot be written down. It is the consciousness that is our little window on the divine consciousness which creates the universe and sustains it. As in Hinduism, the Brahma consciousness is the creative intelligence behind all manifestation. And so as we follow that inner guidance for truth and love and righteousness, actually, that is the path of the perfect Muslim, or the perfect Hindu, or the perfect Buddhist. And if you listen to my commentary in depth on the Quran, read it, study it, I wish it could be translated into Pashto and sent to every school in Afghanistan, every university. Please, somebody sponsor that. We need some translators to type it up in Pashto and print it. It would revolutionize the way that Afghanistan is seen by the outside world, because Afghanistan does not want to be seen as a pariah nation of fanatical Muslims. They just want to be a true nation under God, living in peace. The Switzerland, if you want, of the Middle East. Now, what's so interesting and exciting about this is Afghanistan touches onto the following Islamic countries: Pakistan, obviously, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and China. They all have a land border with Afghanistan, and all those stans and Iran are Islamic countries, or they have a significant Islamic population, even China. If Afghanistan could pioneer what I'm talking about, which is a universal, authentic, hardcore Islamic wisdom tradition, right, then that could spill over. Instead of terrorism based on a false teaching about Islam, authentic wisdom teaching could then spill over to all these other Islamic countries, and we could get a peaceful Middle East. What my vision is, and that could in turn influence Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Azerbaijan, etc., Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. All these Islamic countries, actually, they all want peace. I mean, that's what Islam means. But we've lost the key to it. I'm saying let's reopen the key to authentic peace by going back to the time of Muhammad, looking at his teachings and their context. I'm going further back than Wahhab. The Wahhabis say let's all go back to Muhammad's time, but they don't. They don't actually look at what I'm talking about. The context of the search for moderation that Muhammad believed in, the search for a spiritual enlightenment path, and let the superpowers fight it out. Let's pioneer a third way, where we go to the kingdom of God, hand in hand with all the other prophets of history. That's what we need to be saying now. And so I'd be happy to correspond with any Islamic scholars of comparative religion, experts in peace studies. I'd love to see a Department of Peace Studies at Kabul University. I'd love to see a commentary of the Quran into Pashto and Persian, Dari as well. And I'm doing my best here. One philosopher is doing his best to say enough is enough. What I really don't want, and I'm really going to be annoyed at, is if Western spies, SAS types are flown in from London secretly to go on bombing up Afghanistan in secret. If CIA missions are dropped over the country and they sort of secretly energize extremists to then destabilize even the Taliban. And that's what we've seen, actually. We've seen that with this Al-Qaeda K faction. Where's that come from? Is that really Afghans? I don't believe so. I think this is foreign agents infiltrating the country because they won't let it alone. They won't let it be at peace. And I would say to them, hands off, get out. Those kind of extremists are not wanted. Thank you very much. What we need is a peace treaty with all the peoples of Afghanistan, a constitution written by the help of the greatest Islamic scholars of Afghanistan and the jurists, and also internationally, but also from all those neighbouring countries I mentioned. And it's an academic job. My mentor, Dr. Zaki Badawi, if he was alive, of the Muslim College, he would no doubt tell you who to appoint to that committee. But fortunately, some of his students are still around in Afghanistan. And I think if we do that, we can get peace in that country and in the world. Okay, I'm going to stop there because that's enough to chew on. Till next week, I hope. And I think that I'm just going to finish with one final quote from a little further on in that wonderful Surah 30. I'll just wait for the busy traffic noise of Betet to die away. So give glory to God when ye reach eventide, and when ye rise in the morning. Yea, to him be praise in the heavens and on earth, and in the late afternoon, and when the day begins to decline. It is he who brings out the living from the dead, and brings out the dead from the living, and who gives life to the earth after it is dead. And thus shall ye be brought out from the dead. So, the final point of this surah is to say, look, these superpowers are warring, the Persians, the Romans, and it's still going on today. The Persians and the Romans are still at it, and the Arabians, and the British, and everyone else. Well, the Quran is saying, no, just give praise to the source, the unity, the one, the peace. And all these wars and violence can die down. Okay, so be it. Amen.